So much fun to be together to celebrate a baby blessing and celebrate this holiday of Easter. I want to begin with the words of Jan Richardson. If you were looking for a blessing, do not linger here. Here is only emptiness, a hollow, a husk where blessing used to be. This blessing was not content in its confinement. It could not abide its isolation, the unrelenting silence, the pressing stench of death. So if it is blessing you seek, open your own mouth. Fill your lungs with the air this new morning brings, and then release it with a cry. Hear how the blessing breaks forth in your own voice, how your own lips form every word you never dreamed to say. See how the blessing circles back again, wanting you to repeat it, but louder, how it draws you, pulls you, sends you to proclaim its only word, risen, risen, risen. Whether this is a holiday you celebrate in the theological tradition of Christianity, or whether most of what Easter means to you is pastel formal wear and chocolate bunnies, or whether Easter means very little to you at all, but you are looking to gather in community this morning and sing and connect to that which is most meaningful in your life, welcome. I want to tell a little bit about the Easter story today as it's told in the Christian scriptures. Because despite Easter being one of the most joyful holidays in Christianity, the holiday where we sing Alleluia over and over again, my little household church today was singing Alleluia, because that's often the main thing that we sing on Easter. It's the day to sing Oh Happy Day. The story of Easter itself isn't really a cheerful story, right? As Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom says, the Christian story of Easter that we mark this Sunday is a ritual retelling of a story about the human experience of death and the perpetual hope for resurrection. It's a pathway for people like us to make sense of one of the most painful aspects of being human, of our mortality. So this is what the Christian scriptures tell us about the Easter story. This is what historians say is mostly likely to be true. Jesus lived, that he was a powerful teacher, that he was a strong leader, a wise and loving rabbi who helped people find meaning in difficult times. He was a man who challenged the cultural status quo and spent time with poor people and prostitutes and lepers, those who were considered the lowest of the low in his time. He was a political radical who had committed civil disobedience by turning over the moneylenders' tables in the temple, and he had become such a threat to the establishment that he was arrested without valid charges and put to death by the state in his time. In the time when he was teaching, he gathered 12 male disciples who followed him wherever he went, inspired by his teaching, but often kind of bumbling around, struggling to understand his teachings fully, struggling to implement them in their lives. And there were women in Jesus' life as well, whose stories were not recorded as faithfully as the male disciples, but whose stories live on the edges of the Gospels just as strongly. The men and the women both stayed close to Jesus in his lifetime, experienced his leadership as a blessing in their lives. But when Jesus was arrested, the male disciples fled. They didn't want to get in trouble the way he had gotten in trouble. And so they ran away and hid, or they lied about who they were, or they betrayed him publicly to save themselves. The women who followed Jesus, on the other hand, stayed faithful to him, even at the end of his life. So because Jesus died on the Sabbath, they weren't allowed to properly prepare his body for burial until later, until what is now known as Easter Sunday. And that day, 3 women, Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, and Salome, put their lives at risk by going early to the tomb where Jesus' broken body had been laid. They brought spices and oils to anoint his body, as was the custom at the time. And they made their way to the tomb even though they didn't know how they would roll away the massive stone that they knew had been placed there that blocked its entrance. And so this story is told at least 4 ways in the Christian scriptures, maybe more than 4 ways. And in the later tellings of the stories, the people who wrote down the story later in history, more and more kind of fantastical details are added around Jesus' resurrection and return in his newer and more godly form to his disciples after his death. But in the Gospel of Mark, which most historians consider to be the gospel written nearest to the actual events that they're describing, this is how the story is told. In the Gospel of Mark, it says, when the women arrive at the tomb, they found that the stone at its entrance had already been rolled away, the stone that they didn't know how they would roll away. And inside, they see a young man in white robes sitting there. And it freaks them out. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verse 6, then says, the young man speaks, and he says this. He says, do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him just as he told you. So the women went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's where the story ends, in what many historians consider to be the oldest telling, maybe the most authentic telling. The women come looking to tend to the blessing that is Jesus' body, but find it's simply gone. And when they discover this, they are terrified and amazed. In the words of Jan Richardson, if you are looking for a blessing, do not linger here. Here is only emptiness, a hollow, a husk where blessing used to be. This blessing was not content in its confinement. It could not abide its isolation, the unrelenting silence, the pressing stench of death. The young man who is sitting in that tomb tells them that Jesus has been raised. Go and tell the others. And though at first the Gospels say that they leave without telling anyone in their own fear, the fact of this story's existence tells us that we know that they eventually shared with someone what they had seen. So if it is a blessing you seek, open your own mouth. Fill your lungs with the air the new morning brings, and then release it with a cry. In the scriptures closest to the literal retelling of that very first Easter, there is no story about Jesus' return. There's no story about his meeting his former disciples on the road or joining them for dinner later on. He doesn't give them any instructions. He doesn't prove that he is immortal now with any fancy tricks. It ends with the blessing that was his living, breathing, teaching, loving Jesus body gone. And the women and then the men taking the story into their own lungs, sharing the blessing with their own words. Hear how the blessing breaks forth in your own voice, how your own lips form every word you never dreamed to say. See how it circles back at you again, wanting you to repeat it louder, how it draws you, pulls you, sends you to proclaim its only word, risen, risen, risen. The Easter story is not a cheerful story. It's a story about a transformational spiritual teacher whose time on earth is cut short by the powerful's desire to stay in power. A story not too uncommon from so much of what we see on the news every day. Those who loved him most, those who followed him most closely, show the depth of their own humanity at the end of his life. And there is betrayal, and there is running away, and there is fear and separation. But when all is said and done, the power of the Christian story isn't about Jesus himself, about the sole short length of his life. It's about all the people who find themselves blessed by his teachings of humility and peace and connection across difference and hope and faith and love and forgiveness. The power of the Christian story is about all those people not just letting the blessing of his teachings die with him, but their choice to take the blessing of his teachings into their own bodies, into their own lungs, to proclaim from their own lips and work to live them out in their own lives. It's about how ancient blessings continue to live out in our actions today, even those of us who don't identify as Christian. And to me, this is the real resurrection. This is the real meaning of the word risen. Theologian Reinhold Niebuhr once wrote, "Nothing worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as it is from our standpoint. Therefore, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness." Jesus' life was cut short, but nothing worth doing can ever be achieved fully in any of our lifetimes. Therefore, to learn from his story, we must be saved by hope. The Roman leaders and soldiers who saw Jesus' teachings as a threat to their status quo, to their ability to rule in their own time, these people didn't understand the truth or beauty of his teachings in their own historical context. And so to learn from their story, we must be saved by faith. The true power that lives in the Christian stories and the Christian tradition, whether it's our tradition or not, is not simply the blessing that Jesus offered to the world in his own lifetime. It's the blessing that those who loved him took into their own lungs, into their own voices, their own lives, and proclaimed in ever-widening circles, repeating and echoing across time and space through communities who gather in his name. And therefore, to learn from that power, we must be saved by love. On the first Easter weekend, the religious community that Jesus had gathered around himself shattered. One of his disciples chose to betray him outright. Others failed to stay with him and keep prayerful vigil on his last night alive. Still others denied that they knew him, hid from those who might harm them the way that they had harmed Jesus. And honestly, even the women, even the most faithful of his followers, felt so much fear at the disappearance of his body that they too at first fled in terror and amazement without telling the story of what happened. Fear and self-preservation are strong instincts in each one of us. And all too often, those strong instincts are the first ones that we follow. But though the oldest scriptures end there, the story of Christianity has continued on for 2,000 years, right? And we know that the followers of Jesus didn't let fear or cowardly self-preservation be the last word. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as it is from our standpoint. Therefore, to learn from the nature of our own humanity, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. So, my friends, it is Easter Sunday. Many of you know that I am very, 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 very pregnant. Our first baby is due in 2 days. And most of you also know that today is the last sermon I'll be preaching with you before hopefully giving birth, hopefully very soon, and then entering into parental leave for about 3 months. And when preparing for this Easter sermon day, this holiday that is about birth and rebirth, I felt like I should have some incredible wisdom about birth to share with you. But that wisdom eludes me. I have not given birth yet, and I don't really remember when I was birthed into this world. Although my mom does. She's raising her hand. She's sitting on the couch in front of me. So maybe next Easter I'll have that wisdom to share with you all. For now, here's what I know. This pandemic and my body sometimes drag my heart down in feeling like we are full of hard experiences, that pregnancy will never end and keeps getting harder. But history tells me that everything must change and everything will change. This pandemic will pass. This baby will at some point be born. What I know is that the winter and my midwife tell me that before birth or before rebirth, there must be rest and storing up of energy in order to make it through the difficult experience that is rebirth or birth. The baby inside me tells me that though sometimes it feels like waiting will never end, something new and miraculous is moving inside that interminable waiting. We know that renewal does not always follow loss, that resurrection does not always follow death. We cannot be guaranteed that at the end of this pandemic, we will experience renewal and resurrection. But we do know that loss does always come before renewal. We know that resurrection cannot happen without death first. And so my prayer for this community, for the world, is that we find our way forward into renewal and resurrection out of this time of loss and death. That this time of interminable waiting for the change that we so desperately seek will end soon, hopefully sooner than we hoped. That we will find the new miracle that has been moving this whole time underneath the surface, greeting us with joy and health and new wisdom. I will miss you all in the next few months. I'm so grateful for all of you who are moving into new forms of leadership in order to help hold this community together to help us continue to move towards our mission of awakening love and justice in our lives and in the world. I'm so grateful for Reverend Hannah stepping into the role of acting lead minister while I'm gone, and I know you will be very well served by her ministry, as you have been these past year and a half of us together. I'm so grateful for this community in my own life and in my future kiddos' life. And my friends, someday soon, we don't quite know how soon, we will be able to enter into a new kind of life together, a new hybrid life where we'll be able to hold hands together and sing together in real life, those of us who live in Philly, and where we will maintain this incredible virtual community that we have found and built and that has strengthened us in this time of waiting and loss and death. We must be saved by hope and faith and love, and that final form of love, which is forgiveness. May you carry those lessons from the Christian tradition forth into your day, whether Christianity is something you claim or not. May you find joy in the renewal that nature is showing us all around the Northern Hemisphere this season. Blessed be. Happy Easter and Amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.